Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/MaliciousCompliance, where people get little wins on others to spite them. And in today's episode, OP's Karen boss yells at him, and OP teaches him a lesson he won't forget. Guys, I hope you enjoy the stories. Don't shake your heads too hard. And as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Several years ago, at my first IT job, I worked in a pretty great office. Well, great except for one coworker. Everyone in the office had the same job. We worked IT support, and this required a lot of walking, crawling under desks, and carrying equipment. Each of my coworkers had an assigned area that they were responsible for, and they pulled their weight. All except for Blondie, the office Karen. One day at work, we had a large project. My manager required everyone to pitch in to get this done by the deadline. Everyone except Blondie. Every time there was work to do, she would say that she couldn't because of her heels or skirt. Someone else would have to do her share. Now, normally, I don't care what she or anyone else does or doesn't do. I do my work, she does hers. But on this day, I was told to do the work that she was assigned, and I was not happy. The next day, another coworker of mine, also female, was assigned the work that Blondie could not do because of her wardrobe choices. So that day at lunch, we come up with a plan. The men will all wear kilts the next day, and the two other women will wear skirts and heels to work. The next day at work, we show up to our morning huddle to get our assignments for the day. My boss is visibly uncomfortable, as his team is basically in skirts or kilts. I get my assignments for the day, and I immediately tell my boss that I can't due to wearing a kilt. The rest followed my lead, and the day was amazingly unproductive. We barely got anything done, and no one can say anything about it because they've let Blondie do this for years. On day number 2, my boss is even more frustrated, and he pulls me aside, asking what the heck is going on. That's when I hand him a well-written dress code policy that another office uses, that's already been approved by legal. So my boss spends the day fast-tracking the approval of this policy, and at the end of another horribly unproductive day, we have a surprise team meeting. There is now a dress code that requires long pants and closed-toed shoes for safety reasons, and Blondie's look of rage directed at me made no mistake that she knew I was responsible for this. And I do want to note that I don't care who you are, what you look like, or what gender you are. I, however, do care about the quality and quantity of your work. If you're hiding from pulling your weight intentionally by wearing a skirt and then complaining you can't work in it, I will put a stop to it. Oh man, guys, I wish I could have seen the boss when his team showed up like that. And I'm really surprised they let Office Karen get away with that for years. Like, I would have been all over that as soon as I figured out Karen's little master plan. But there is a downside to the whole thing, guys. This person comments, I mean, this is great and all, but you screwed yourself out of getting to wear kilts at work. This happened when I was around 13 or so, and my brother is 3 years older than me. I woke up one morning to my brother huffing and bellowing and just being a jerk. I didn't take very long to realize that he'd locked himself out of his room. I offered to help him, but as soon as I did, he turned around and snapped at me to F up. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, sure. I went inside the kitchen and I had breakfast, eating slowly and just watching the insanity unfold. My brother is stalking from his room to the back of the house, out the back door, circling around outside to wrestle with his window, and then to the front of the house, and then comes in through the front door and paces back and forth in front of his door again. No matter what he tries, he can't get inside. And at this point I say, are you sure you don't want help? At that he says, get effing lost, you idiot. If I want help, I'll ask you for it. So with that, I go into the living room and I boot up his PlayStation that he left in the living room. He's so preoccupied with doing his circuits outside that he doesn't even notice. Lunchtime rolls around and I ask him if he's absolutely certain he doesn't want help. Once again, I get a slew of expletives. You know how brothers are. So I go back inside, make a sandwich, grab a glass of orange juice, and then go back outside to sit and watch, as he does his rounds and wrestles with the window. Meanwhile, I enjoy my lunch, and go back inside to play more of his games. Hours later, the sun's going down, and I've had my fill of games, and I go to check on how he's doing. He's standing there defeated, staring helplessly at his window like it's betrayed him. I then say, so, how you doing? Managed to get in yet? He doesn't hear the sarcasm, and he looks like he's about to cry. He then says to me, no, look, I'm sorry about shouting at you earlier, but I locked myself out. I gave his arm a comforting pat and nodded. I say to him, yeah, I could tell, it's been a long day. Would you like some help? He then says to me, I don't know what you could do, but yeah, I've tried everything. And at this point I tell him, "Oh, it's no problem. Have you tried this yet?" I then pulled the top of his window down where he's been trying to wrestle it up the whole time. You see, the house is old and the windows have been painted over many times, so much so that everyone but me forgot that once upon a time you could actually open the windows from the top, even if it was locked from the inside. And the look on his face as I walked away makes me wish I'd been wearing sunglasses or walked away polishing my nails on my shirt. It's been 20 years since then, and that jaw drop was so satisfying that it makes me smile even to this day. I waited all day for my apology, and damn did it feel good when I finally got it. Guys, and that's why you need to hide a spare key somewhere in the house to prevent stuff like this from happening. And if only big brothers weren't so stubborn, right? Like, what could have been a 10-second solution ended up taking up his whole day. With that said though, I do feel like that's a security issue, like being able to open the window when it's locked. That's definitely not a good thing. But someone also once told me, guys, that if someone really wants to get inside your home, they'll find a way to get inside your home. For a small bit of context, my father-in-law died 2 years ago. He was living with us at the time due to health issues. About 6 months after his death, we start getting letters from debt collectors asking for stupid amounts of money, like absurd amounts of money. We did as asked, and we provided a copy of his death certificates and was told it was sorted. He didn't have much money and covered his funeral. Father-in-law wanted to be cremated, so we did as asked, and we had him stashed in the cupboard under the stairs. Wife has put his ashes under a tree, but saved some for if we ever move. A few weeks ago, we have several suited men turn up at our house. I go out the back door and I walk to the front of the house. We live on a farm. I then ask the men what they're doing on my property, and they say that they're here to collect an outstanding debt, and I ask to see the paperwork. The only debt we have is a mortgage, which we pay on time without fail. As I'm looking over the paperwork, they're looking at my car, my work equipment, looking like they've hit the jackpot. I guess they were planning on repoing that stuff to pay the debt. I then noticed the name was father-in-law, and then explained to them that he's been dead for 2 years. They still demand to see him, as they have no record of this, and they say that they'll take the items to cover his debts. This is the point I pull out my phone and text my wife to call police because of trespassers, and also ask for her to put her dad's ashes in the front porch. I then tell the debt collectors that I've contacted her father and he'll be with us shortly. I also tell them that until he's here, they're to wait off my property as I'm the homeowner. I had to show them my ID to prove I wasn't the man they're looking for. Once the police turned up, they all drove back onto my property and I fetched the box of ashes. The debt collectors asked again if they could speak to father-in-law, so I hand them the bag of ashes, which had the label that reads, "The remains of father-in-law," and then the date. That's when I looked the main debt collector in the face and I said, "I told you he was dead several times and you still asked to see him. I hope you guys have a good chat and you're able to sort out this mess. Oh, and while you're speaking to him, can you ask him where he left my spare workshop key?" After saying that, I turned to the police. And I explain how I've also asked them to get off my property several times and they refused because they needed to see father-in-law. They hand back the ashes and are getting ready to leave. And that's when I look at the police officer and he burst out laughing. The officer asked if they'll be coming back, or are they satisfied with the evidence. They claim to be happy with it. I've now added a lock to my main gate and an intercom. This morning, I get a buzz, just as I'm setting up for the morning's work. It was the same debt collection company, wanting again to see father-in-law. I just grab the box of ashes and copies of the death certificate, and I head down to the main gate, where I see 2 suited gentlemen and a very large van blocking my gate. I've driven down in my van, and I get out, box and papers in hand. I again explain that he's dead. I then show the death certificate and they ask again to speak to him. So I hand over the box and ask for the head office phone number. I then stand in front of them, calling their boss, and then explain that I've shown the death certificate and his ashes, and how do they expect him to pay his debts now that he's dead? After I spoke to the boss, they've assured me that they will not be returning. So yeah, I think they finally got the hint after that. And if I were OP, the second time they showed up on my property, I would have just called the police. Definitely wouldn't have bothered with that again. Okay, this story is set 19 years ago. The place I worked at was the big office of an interior designer in a big city I lived in. I'd been looking for tech work, and someone I knew had recently been hired on as office manager, so she brought me on. I was happy to land a job providing tech support, and to be earning a decent hourly wage with flexible hours, but little did I know how bizarre this place was. And how bizarre, you ask? Well, my acquaintance, the new office manager, was never in the office. The designer, let's call him Boss, was also never there. And let me tell you a little bit about Boss. He was an older guy, late 60s, which was ancient to my 22-year-old self. He constantly ground his teeth and clenched his jaw, and he always seemed distracted. He just had a general vibe of being weird. So I get this new gig, and pretty immediately find myself alone in a nice big office space with no onboarding, no training, and nothing to do. Literally come to work, surf the web for hours, and then go home or to class. Every now and then, Boss would randomly come in and ask me to do something vaguely tech-related, like create a spreadsheet for client names. And then he would ask me to show him how to do the same thing. I would do it, he'd be thrilled, and he would give me a bonus right on the spot, which was pretty sweet, right? Until Boss started coming in and losing his lid about random things, like the green ink on his printed Excel spreadsheet was the wrong hue. Or the office manager called in, and why the hell did she need the day off? Or any number of other random things, none of which were my fault, and many of which I had absolutely nothing to do with. But I would always take the brunt of it. The guy screamed at me so hard one day that I almost cried. My boss was ripping me a new one whenever he was in the office, which became more frequently. And that's when I learned from the office manager that my boss had been cleared to return to working more hours by his psychiatrist. And I'm thinking, wait, what? So it turns out my boss was never around when I started because he had a mental breakdown. So he had been advised to step back from work. So the distractedness was meds, the teeth grinding was uncontrollable stress reaction. He even did it in his sleep, which was so bad that the dentist was concerned about his jawbone having microfractured. And I'm thinking, great. So the guy gets back into the swing of things and he takes everything out on me. Again, I'm 22 years old, my wife's in grad school, and I need this job. I'm feeling the stress, and I'm always thinking about work, just stewing over the last thing I got unfairly yelled at about. I'm waking up 3 to 4 times a night for no reason I can think of, and my wife says I toss and turn when I do sleep. This goes on for weeks. And then one day, Boss walks in with a brand new handheld voice recorder. He hands it to me and says, when I record a voice note, I want it to be saved there as boss, date, note number. And I need you to show me how to use it. And I'm thinking, okay, this is actually in my wheelhouse. So I take the recorder, grab the manual, and then start tinkering. I come up with a quick how-to curriculum, and then read a note in the manual that says, voice recordings are saved in the device as voice recording number, time, date, .vrn. Once you import them to your PC, you may rename them as required. So the boss's initial request is not possible with the hardware, but there's a simple workaround. I document that and go sit with Boss to go over it. And naturally, he blows up at me, screaming that I'm useless and I can't even do one single task, that he can't believe I can't figure this one thing out. He then starts berating me, asking me dumb stuff like, did I even look at the manual? Can I even read? That he knows it can do what he wants, that I just have to do my job and learn how to make the changes. And that's when he says, you need to go home right now, and don't you dare come back until you've figured out how to do what I want. At that point, I've had enough. I thought to myself, forget this place and this stupid boss. So cue my relieved but gleeful malicious compliance. I do as my boss says. I go home, and since I know what boss is asking is impossible, I never even consider returning. I don't call in the next day, I don't go in, I try to forget the whole ordeal, and I do begin to sleep like a baby. 2 weeks passed. I've practically moved on, looking for another job, doing school, the normal stuff. And that's when I get a call from Boss out of the blue. My boss says to me, hey, you haven't been at work in a while. Is everything okay? When are you coming back to work? We need your help here. I've got some tech issues that I need your help with. Why are you not at work? And hearing him say that, I'm floored. Like the guy's talking to me like the last time we spoke, he wasn't screaming at me at the top of his lungs, spewing spit everywhere. So I say to him, dude, you told me to go home and to not come back until I figured out that voice recorder. So I didn't come back, cause that thing is never gonna do what you want. At that, my boss says, oh, that thing? I took it back to the store, so I'll see you tomorrow. Please come back to work. We need you. I just tell him, no, I figured I was fired, so I've got another job. Please mail me my last check, and don't call me anymore. Thanks. Bye. And with that, I disconnected the call, laughing. It never felt so satisfying to be unemployed. Oh man, guys, I'm just wondering why it took the boss 2 weeks to call OP wondering where the heck he was. I'm just glad OP decided to move on when they did, because holy cow did that place seem like a nightmare to work at. Like, imagine just showing up day after day just to get yelled at. Some jobs just aren't worth losing your sanity over. Here's a story that happened a long time ago. I haven't worked at the store for 7 years. I'm a teacher now, so thankfully, I don't have to deal with customers, just some crazy parents. I used to work as a checker/stalker at a grocery store. Our manager, Mike, was a complete D-bag. He would always try to screw people over. There was massive turnover at the store. So one day, I get called into his office and asked why I gave overtime on my time card. I was usually scheduled for 1 to 10 p.m., but the store didn't close until 10 o'clock, so I had to count on my drawer afterwards. I explained this to Mike, and he did not care. He went off saying that I should be doing this earlier, that I was supposed to leave at 10 on the dot, so I had no overtime. I thought to myself, I got it, boss man. A couple of weeks later, it was Thanksgiving time. We had extra checkers, but from 8 to 10 p.m. I was the only one besides the manager who closed the store that day. I make the announcement at about 9:40 that we would be closing in 20 minutes and to please finish up your purchases to check out. People start coming up to check out and their carts were loaded since it was Thanksgiving. I go about checking all of them out, but the clock turns to 10 o'clock. And that's when I stop in the middle of my transaction. I call Mike on the store phone and tell him that I'm leaving since I can't have overtime. I then walk over and clock out. There's still like 6 to 7 customers with full baskets in line at this time. Mike comes over and he's yelling at me as I'm walking out, but I remind him that he specifically told me that I can't have any overtime and that I have to leave at 10 o'clock on the dot. When I got to work the next day, I was written up, but it was worth it. Apparently, he spent the next 30 to 45 minutes checking people out, and he was mad. Yeah, I would not have taken that write-up so kindly, guys. I would have been all over that, fighting the write-up. Like, how are you to tell me that I'm not allowed to stay a minute past 10 o'clock and then have the audacity to write me up when I leave exactly at 10 o'clock? So basically, OP worked at a company that expected her to go above and beyond for customers, work overtime, but not get paid a single cent for it. Is that even legal, guys? I was employed at a small market radio station for many years a while back. I loved the actual work, but the people there were terrible, particularly the manager in this story. She spent 7 years pretending we were friends, working up from sales to sales manager and eventually station manager. And then one day, she decides to make my job a completely miserable experience. She would hold station meetings without me, create recording sessions without putting them on my schedule, ignoring my reports of tech issues so things never got fixed. It was ridiculous how little managing she actually did. Basically, there had been a buildup of her crap leading up to this story, and this was the final real time I put my foot down. Since we were a small staff and I was the employee with the most years, I had a lot of responsibilities. The easiest way of describing my job was I did everything except sell ads. Every day had the same main responsibilities, but minor changes kept each day different. I would punch in at 8 a.m. and co-host the final hour of the morning show, and then answer phones and the door all day, record ads and clients, edit shows, do the afternoon broadcast from 1 to 5 p.m., and then pre-record the evening news block to air after I leave for the day. One day, the morning show host decided that we need to talk about America's Got Talent. But by the time he has this great idea, auditions were 3 shows in. And I had never watched the show before because I absolutely hate reality TV. But I thought to myself, what could it hurt? And I went home that night to watch the week 4 episode. While it was entertaining, it was also an overly padded waste of time. But I did my homework and did the show the next morning and hyped it up like it was the greatest thing ever. The next week, I forgot to watch. I go into work and the morning show host asked what I thought, and I panicked for a second before telling him I didn't see it. Since I had about 20 minutes of morning news before I was live, I ran to my office and checked YouTube for the highlights reel, and there it was, an hour-long TV show whittled down to a 15-minute video, which was perfect. When it was done, I moved to the broadcast studio and did a great recap of last night's episode. Even the host, who watched the entire show, thought I did a great job keeping up with him. The 6th episode comes around, and this time, I remembered it was on. But since I knew NBC was going to post the highlights tomorrow, I opted to spend my free time on something I actually wanted to do. The next morning, I go straight to the highlight reel and caught up on every act that was important to talk about. Again, the show host thought that I did a great job, but my manager didn't think it was good enough. She calls me into her office to ask why I was purposely ignoring requests to watch the show. I asked her what difference does it make whether I watch the hour broadcast versus watching the highlight reel that has every high point and does the same job in 15 minutes. She said it makes a difference and wouldn't elaborate. She was always pulling that I'm right and I don't have to tell you why crap. She then pointed out that next week was when the judges began cutting acts, and there was going to be episodes every Tuesday and Wednesday for the rest of the broadcast, and watching it was mandatory. I asked her how long are these episodes, and she said they're an hour each. And that's when I decided to put an end to this BS once and for all. I say to her, so that's 2 hours of show prep each week. Do I mark that down on my timesheet as overtime, or am I expected to cut out at 3 p.m. on Fridays so I don't go over my scheduled 40 hours? My manager's eyes bugged out, like she never once expected me to demand payment for dictating how I spend my time outside the office. I just stood there waiting to see if I was going to be making extra money or getting an early start to the weekend. Suddenly, the 15-minute highlight reel during the regular paid office hours was good enough. Funny how that works, right? Yeah, that just sounds like homework for adults, guys. Like telling someone what they must watch on TV on their own hours is absolutely crazy. Power tripping Karen bosses, right? Like how did she even think that was remotely okay? And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /malicious compliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/petty revenge episode, where OP's nightmare neighbor tries to destroy his reputation and get him evicted. And it backfires so hard on her, guys. Go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.